Welcome. This is the Eastern Influenced Corporate Leader podcast, hosted by Alana May Mitchell, where each episode we tune in to Eastern wisdom.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Eastern Influence Corporate Leader. I did a poll on Instagram and I found out that a lot of you listen to the podcast while you're driving. So if you're driving, I hope you're having a beautiful drive while you tune in. I am so excited and so delighted to speak with our guest today, who has been a significant person in my life. So this is really special, I just know from the very beginning. So Gisele Gambi is an intuitive business coach who shifts paradigms with the leaders she works with. Gisele was the catalyst for my own personal transformation as my dear coach. And I love her and I love her work so much that I invited her to be on the show today. She has been coaching since 2004. And before that, she led teams in a HR directorship role in five-star hotels. The people who work with Gisele experience multidimensional shifts in their business, lives, and families. She is also, and this is super exciting, the creator and host of the Intuitive Pull podcast. And she is currently writing her own book about digging deeper and discovering the plans we did not make. Gisele, welcome to the show today. It's great to have you here.
Oh, thank you so much, Alana. I actually have my eyes a little shiny at that introduction.
Oh,
yeah, it's really beautiful. Yeah, quite. It's a 360-degree circle being here, really, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, like totally the plan we did not make.
Not at all. And I think to share a bit of inspiration, when Gisele and I were talking, when we were coaching only a few months ago, I had said, oh, you know, the East has been such an influence and it could be a series of LinkedIn articles. And then we discovered that it could be a book. And then before the book came the podcast, and that was the plan that we didn't make. And then Giselle's starting her own podcast as well. So,
and you're interviewing me.
Yeah, so
thank you.
Much fun. There's so much that we could cover, and I thought a good place to start, because we know each other really well, and for someone who doesn't know, I thought a really good place to start would be some of the shifts that you've experienced in your own life from an intuitive perspective and an Eastern influence, like an Eastern wisdom perspective, because I know that mindfulness and meditation is very important to you. So some of the major shifts.
You know, I have to say that all the major shifts that I've had, maybe bar one, have been as a result of meditation, as a result of what I've received from the meditative space. So bar one, which was the first big shift that I had when I was 20, that wasn't in a meditative space, but the first big shift that I had when I was, how old was I? Well, I don't know how old I was. I'll just tell you the year it was. It was 2002.
Yeah.
30 years ago, actually. I had just, I was in chaos. I was in chaos, and had just experienced a few years before the death of my first son. When he was 11 days old, as you know the story, and that my marriage broke up, and my life was absolutely in crisis. And my best male friend said to me, come and do this personal development program. And it was like a really big 8-month long program. And it was a couple of months into the program, and part of the method that we learned was about intuition. And the thing is, I'd always been intuitive, though, like right back to when I was at high school. I can remember moments where I was intuitive. But anyway, back to this moment on this program, we went into this really big meditative space, and we connected with our intuition. And then my son, who had passed, arrived in my meditation. And I was compelled to start writing. And, the words I remember, exactly as they were, which are, you're here to ignite people's spirits and hearts. That's what you did for me. And 11 days was all I needed. And now I do the same to you. And those words, like I was in a mess.
Yeah.
I was in an emotional mess. Those words meant everything to me, but I didn't actually know what they meant at a practical level. So that was the first big shift that I had as a result of going into meditation. And those words meant so much to me at an emotional level that I knew I actually had to leave my HR career. Otherwise, the energy or the directive of those words would just get lost in my day-to-day.
Sure.
So that was the first one. And I spent 6 months meditating every day. What do these words mean? You're here to ignite people's spirits and hearts. And then 6 months down the track, I realized, I'm here to bring what I learned on that program, which was all about taking 100% personal responsibility for my reality and getting out of the blame and judgment paradigm. And I thought, when I working in HR, that's all that we deal with, unfortunately. That's all that I dealt with back then was blame and conflict. And I thought if I could bring that concept of 100% personal responsibility into the HR world, into the corporate world, that would change everything. So that was the first big one. That totally turned the ship. And from a Eastern influenced point of view, in addition to the meditation, I mean, I had to let go. I had to detach from my identity
as the HR
director. And my mum and dad love titles and all of that. And I couldn't actually explain when I told them I wanted to leave my HR directorship role. I couldn't actually explain what I was moving into. So I couldn't understand it. So I had to really let go, like really detach from who I had been, from who I'd known myself to be.
Wow. Thank
and
you.
Surrender.
Yeah. Yeah. And thank you so much for sharing, the more intimate details of, what's gone on before.
Yeah.
You mentioned there 100% personal responsibility. And I know from your work that that's a huge thing. What does that look like for a leader to step into that reality or that world, if you like, where they are 100% personally responsible?
Well, instead of being in the blame and judgment triangle where we play 3 roles, we play the role of when things aren't going well. When things aren't going well, we default to these roles. We default to a role of victim, that this happened to me. If somebody has done something, we default to the role of persecutor. And sometimes we default to the role of rescuer, which sometimes looks like a really good thing, a really honorable thing. But actually the rescuer requires people to be in their powerlessness to be able to rescue, to be able to get a kick. And so when leaders are in that triangle, I mean, there's never any outcome that is win-win for everybody. There's never a win-win. And so it's really limited. And, gosh, when I worked in the corporate world, it's a long time ago now, that was, and I'm sure it still is, that power or relationship dynamic was how everybody related when things weren't going well. And so to step into 100% personal responsibility means stepping outside of that victim, persecutor, rescuer triangle and going to a place of cause. And so when we go to a place of cause, we travel the road of cause and effect. So whatever is happening on the outside, we ask ourselves, who was I being that I was more than likely unconscious to, that created that outcome? And there's only freedom then. There's only freedom then. And the freedom, when I went to that place for myself about, the chaos and the crisis that I was in, and I realized that I didn't know that I had beliefs that I was unworthy, I didn't know that. I didn't know that I carried around beliefs that I didn't feel like I was worthy. And so therefore I created a reality with a husband, that didn't treat me well, et cetera, et cetera. I created that reality. When I realized that I was the source of that reality, I was free. And it was that freedom that so inspired me to bring that into the corporate world. So to a leader, it means freedom. That's what it means.
Yeah, right. And the piece on beliefs is quite a big part in that. That's almost like, to use your terms, the catalyst for the shift, making the unconscious conscious.
Yes, because most people think that what they do creates their result. But as you and I know, it's who we're being behind what we're doing that actually creates the result.
So what does it feel like when you're in the presence of a leader who is conscious of who they're being? And for people who this is new to, the being is like your consciousness, your energy, the choices you're making, choosing this over that. That's how I understand being. I'd love to, like, what is, because, and the other thing in that is your resonance. So the vibration that you're holding is a lot higher. So what does it feel like for to be in the presence of a leader who is conscious of who they're being and then what they're doing?
To be in the presence of a leader like that, I mean, I'm just thinking of myself when I've been in the presence of a leader like that. I mean, it's life-changing, to be honest. It's life-changing to be in the presence of a leader like that, where they're not attacking you, they're not blaming you, they're absolutely holding you accountable, but from a stance of only wanting the best for that person. So in the presence of a leader who is taking responsibility and knowing that who they are being behind what they're doing is actually creating the result, it actually invites the other person to step into that place themselves.
Sure.
I mean, there's no power games that go on in the presence of a leader who takes responsibility for who they're being.
Which is huge in the corporate setting.
I mean, there's one example, not in a practical way. I'm not going to give a practical example, but at a level of complete inspiration. I remember when my coach said something to me like, how could God talking to God ever be a boundary crossed? When I was talking about inspiration or intuition, crazy intuition that I'd received, like crazy intuition that felt so wrong for me. I received intuition about his wife, even though I knew nothing about her. And which is what happens with me sometimes when I'm in meditation, people come into my awareness and they'll receive information about them and I'll message them, and sometimes that's all that's needed, and sometimes they come on as a client. But when I had that happen about my coach's wife, I thought to myself, there's no way I can do this. This is completely inappropriate, like totally a boundary crossed. And so I spoke to him about it simply to offload, not for any other reason. And he said to me, how could God, talking to God, ever be a boundary crossed? So from a completely not a rational point of view, a leader who is present to who they really are and calling the other into presence of who they really are is really God talking to God.
Yeah.
Totally different paradigm to what can I get out of this? How can I make myself look great, even perhaps at the expense of another?
Sure.
Like, it's so generous. It's a really generous paradigm. Presence is a really generous state of being.
It is. And I feel as if what I'm feeling in me now is that the conversation has lifted.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, and it's so not rational, right?
Not
You
at
can't
all.
get this with rational mind. It's and I think this is, in answer to your question, it's an energetic experience. It's an energetic exchange that happens at a level of feeling, which then can be rationalized and understood. But it's like that. Yeah, it's an energetic exchange.
They often say that we decide based on how we feel and then we rationalize it after.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
And so what might it, for a leader who feels that, like that high level resonance of God speaking with God, not trying to gain anything from the other person, like how might that open up for them? How might they?
I mean, we're talking about what you're talking about now, where you're taking the conversation here.
Yeah.
Is about leadership is about being of service. Like, that's the actual intention. Whereas leadership from the paradigm of the victim, persecutor, rescuer triangle, and from the paradigm of what I do is what creates the result, is actually quite self-centered, because it's all about self and about ensuring that self is valid and acknowledged and needed and wanted. Whereas where you've taken the conversation, it's about actually how can I be of service to the other person? And then, of course, I mean, that we're talking about generosity again, because when we're of service to the other person, I mean, that's love. And love is infinite. It's an infinite energy. And, this is where more than what we could expect or imagine arrives. Because we're working or leading and living in a space of faith and trust. And actually, here's a big one in terms of the corporate world and leadership. We're operating from a space that's outside of control. We're letting go of control.
Sure.
Which is a big one, right?
Huge.
I mean, that's huge.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And so when we're letting go of control and we're in trust and faith and in service to another and ourselves, we're in service to all. Like, everybody benefits in ways that are, beyond expectation.
And you mentioned that like love, and I know that from your previous work as unconditional love.
Yeah.
So what kind of an impact has unconditional love had on your life and the people you work with?
If unconditional love isn't present and judgment is in its place, non-acceptance is in its place, nothing can shift. So it's like, 100% personal responsibility, traveling the road of cause and effect, and unconditional love. Like, they're almost like the equation. That plus that equals transformation. Without unconditional love, we're in judgment. we're in resistance, we're in non-acceptance. And whenever that, this is a Eastern philosophy, what we resist persists. So as long as we're not accepting, it will just continue coming back.
And what I'm feeling is the contrast of that and what we're traditionally taught. So I know from like a performance perspective that we're taught to set SMART goals, and we take measurable actions towards our goals to reach our goals, and it's very focused on the doing.
Yeah.
Which is that what most people are used to. The flip of that, and what you're inviting people into, is, as I hear it, is the more like emotional, energetic aspect of kind of like alignment in who you are to create the end result.
You got it.
Yeah.
And I think, well said. That was perfectly said, actually, because that energetic alignment is what is the missing piece. Largely is the missing piece in the corporate world, simply because there's no awareness or little awareness of it, because it's not mainstream yet. However, look what you're doing.
and also the people who are listening to this are getting exposure.
Yeah. I've got an example where taking 100% personal responsibility plus unconditional love, that formula created really beautiful and significant transformation. And it's with a current client who has invested in a business with two other partners, and those two other partners are partnered up, like they're coupled up into, as an intimate relationship. So he's kind of like the third wheel. and he was going through some stuff and didn't turn up in a way that was in integrity with who he is, and was experiencing anxiety, load of anxiety, which then would spiral him even more into losing himself.
Sure.
And not acting with integrity, different behaviors, different ways of showing up with his business partners. So of course, his business partners therefore lost trust. And so we went to a place of taking 100% personal responsibility for where that actually came from, where the anxiety came from, where the lack of integrity in how he was showing up came from, which goes all the way back to childhood, which then brought in compassion for himself, which then brought in acceptance of the situation, which therefore brought in unconditional love for himself. And I invited him to do something which doesn't normally happen in the corporate world, because as we talked about before, control is the preference to vulnerability. And I invited him to have a conversation with his business partners from a place of humility and vulnerability, to take responsibility for his behavior and his actions, not from a place of self-judgment, from a place of compassion and unconditional love and humility and vulnerability. And that happened on a few occasions. And the outcome of that was that it created a hugely emotional response in his business partners, where they then went into a place of acceptance for him and compassion and unconditional love, and their relationship, bonded. They became closer.
Wow.
Yeah.
All that from an energetic shift.
All that from an energetic shift.
And
if,
go on.
I was going to say, if you think about if that energetic shift, if that awareness of his own, if that own self-awareness wasn't present, that partnership would have collapsed. They would have booted him out. He would have lost all of his money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he was able to do that from the doing aspect was he felt his emotions and welcomed in compassion, as you said. So he, in a way, spent more time with himself
Yes.
to create that result, which is like it's all relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that relation, the energetic shifts that he experienced in that shifted his relationship, which in turn shifted his business, their business results.
Yes. Exactly. That's exactly right. And as I said, had he not done that, that business would have collapsed and he would have lost a lot of money.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So I'm just thinking about for the corporate leader who's, or leaders of teams, people tuned in that lead teams, like the amount of like transformation that can occur from holding their own inner realizations
Yes.
in a space of unconditional love and compassion,
Yeah.
and valuing that time that they spend in that reflective. And it doesn't, from speaking from experience, it doesn't take long. It's not a hard thing to do.
Yeah.
That is like the dynamics of how to shift how you show up, who you be as a leader, is what I got from what you just said.
Yes. And then that ripples onto the people that they're leading, right? It's like they go first. They show up in their personal responsibility, in their unconditional love, in their humility and vulnerability. It doesn't mean that we have to show all our wounds and tell all our deepest, darkest secrets to the whole world, to the whole team.
Yeah.
Right. There's some things, I'm sure, there's a sensitivity there too.
Yeah.
And sometimes the conversation with the team or the business partner or the colleague doesn't even have to happen. Sometimes,
Right.
we've seen this lots of times. Sometimes simply that energetic shift that has happened within that person creates a different reality on the outside simply from taking responsibility. Like how many times have we experienced, and gosh, there's somebody in the group that we laugh at this, because every time that he would experience an energy, say sales weren't happening and he was really worried about money, and then he'd go to a place of taking 100% personal responsibility, seeing who he was being energetically, having compassion, unconditional love for himself, and then that client that had been stalling all of a sudden he gets an email saying, I'd like to go ahead with that business. Like how many times has that happened?
Yeah.
So it's not like as if we have to have the conversation each time. Sometimes
No.
it's really valuable to have the conversation, but it's not necessary. It's us.
Yeah. And what I'm hearing, because I'm for the benefit of the people tuning in, I'm switching between the corporate world that I know and the coaching world that I know, and languaging it in a way that that makes the most sense, because I've actually never spoken consciously about these dynamics with Gisele, with yourself before. What I know that as in the corporate world is role modeling. And so though I wanted to just speak to briefly how role modeling is in the corporate world, how it's viewed, and the invitation that you're making for people to step into. Because the role modeling that I know from the corporate world is show people through your actions. So show, like, follow up that email, send those minutes, like give that direction. Like it's very three-dimensional, tangible actions that you take to role model, which have a place.
Yes.
This is a bigger and I would say higher vibration container for role modeling,
Yes.
because you're modeling who you're being as a leader through the consciousness, the emotions, the feelings that you're having, the presence that you're having for your team.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So it's beyond transaction, right?
Yes.
That's what you're saying. It's role modeling in that energetic transaction.
Yeah,
so I
exactly.
remember when actually in 1999 I went to this awesome program. I don't think it exists anymore, through the Australian Institute of Management. And it was called super working back then, because meditation wasn't you couldn't talk about meditation in the corporate world back then. And that's actually where I learned to meditate,
Okay. On super working.
in this program called super working. I don't think it exists anymore. And I loved it so much that I went back to my team, and we would close the door at 8:30 in the morning. We'd come to work a little earlier. We'd close the door at 8:30 in the morning. And back then, I'd bought all of this super working meditation cassette tapes, because it was cassette tapes back then.
Yeah.
And we'd dim the lights, we'd close the door, and we'd meditate every morning.
Oh, wow.
And that was 1999.
Oh, wow.
A long time ago.
Yeah.
As I said, I mean, and you couldn't, that they couldn't just word. I mean, she was really open with us, the leader. She said, I can't call it meditation because it just won't get accepted. So she called it, I think, something like a high performance practice or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Groundbreaking at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
And that actually created, I mean, I'm still friends with my team from back then. That was one of the things, because it's a different experience. It is so beyond the transaction, because it was of service. Like I cared for them. Wanted to share this experience because I had loved it so much. In fact, I then went and created a program called High Performance, based on what I'd learned, and taught all the managers how to meditate back then.
And who was the program for?
The managers of the hotels that I worked for.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So yes, it's an energetic exchange rather than a transactional doing exchange, which, as you said, is important. It has to happen. Those things have to happen, but it's beyond that.
Yeah.
And the result of that is just great. One of the results of that, I should say, is greater connection with each other and greater presence within ourselves. It's like starting the day from a present place.
Yeah.
Which creates a different result.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually allows those SMART goals to be realized.
Yeah, in like a highly intelligent way.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it does. It's like the fuel almost for
Yes.
the SMART goals to come about, because even those SMART goals, like we know that there's a field of consciousness, as some people that have been on the show have spoken about before, and all ideas come from the field. So those SMART goals have also come from that bigger field of consciousness.
That's right. So yeah, intuition and inspiration arrives in those moments, which might actually mean that the SMART goal gets achieved, or even beyond achieved, but in a really efficient way, in a totally different way, perhaps.
I'd love to touch on that with what you've just mentioned there, Gisele, about the SMART goal, which is specific, measurable,
actionable results
and transformational. For those people that know, there's probably a whole bunch of people tuning in that know that off by heart. And then I just know it as SMART. So I know that from the context that you're coming from is that there's the result, and holding the result in, I want to achieve, let's say it's 150% of my sales targets. I want to achieve 150%. What happens when you hold it in the container of I want to achieve, you could do one of two ways. You could probably do, I want to achieve 150% or more, or I want to achieve stellar sales results. What
Nice.
happens when you do that as a leader?
You invite, well, if you're present, right? Because if you're not present and it's the ego that says, I want to achieve stellar results for my own personal gain so that I look really good and I'm better than everybody else. And, you know, I get the bonus, and there's nothing wrong with getting the bonus at all. And when we come from a place of being of service to everyone and therefore generosity, and we're present, then those stellar results occur not necessarily through the means that we thought we needed to achieve them by, right, the rational plan, but through intuition and inspiration that arrives because you're present. So there might be an idea that arrives in meditation. And when I talk about meditation, I don't even talk about you have to sit with your eyes closed, you know, in traditional type of, you know, with your legs crossed, or, I mean, you can, and I do, I don't cross my legs, but you know, you can go for, I receive a lot of intuition when I go for a run or go for a walk. It's when we have moments where we give ourselves space to log off that rational mind and that doing mind. And so the means by which those people will achieve those stellar results are more than likely not the means that they thought that they would achieve them, because intuition and inspiration has arrived. And so they might achieve them quicker, they might achieve them beyond what they thought that they could achieve. Maybe other things have arrived as well that creates, you know, different tangents that are in addition to that initial SMART goal result.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you for exploring that.
That's all right.
We're going to move into a meditation shortly that Giselle's so kind enough to lead for us today. And I wanted to let people know how they can connect with you if they're interested in learning more about your work, or I know you're a passionate writer if they want, and now you have the podcast. So how can people connect with you?
Well, through Facebook is one means. So my business page, which is called Gisele Gambi, or connect with me through my personal page. The Intuitive Pull podcast, which the first trailer's out, and the first episode is out on the 29th of November. And my website, my new upgraded website, is almost complete and will definitely be available in a few weeks' time. So you can connect with me through there. There's a lot of videos on there as well. And on the Facebook page are a lot of my writings. So
yep,
thanks for asking that question.
Oh, of course. And I encourage you, as I have, to subscribe to or follow to the Intuitive Pull podcast. You can find that on Apple is where I've subscribed, and on Spotify as well. And then what happens is that you'll get a notification when that first episode drops on the 29th of November, which will be exciting to tune in for. And speaking of tuning in, what we'll do now is tune into a meditation. And before the call, so Gisele, working with presence, has taken presence to another level in our conversation. And there was no planned idea for the meditation. So that is going to be a reflection and an inspiration from what we've just discussed. So I'm just so excited to dive into that.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I've decided not to plan it. I thought, let's just see where the conversation goes, and then I will create a meditation based on that so that it can be integrated through meditation. So thank you. Okay. All right. So closing your eyes and taking a really deep breath in right down to your lower belly, and exhaling. And another really big, deep breath in, really filling up your lungs, breathing in life force. And then exhaling. And begin by thanking yourself for being here, for taking the time to listen or to watch this episode that has been born through Alana's generosity and genuine intent to be of service. So take that generosity and genuine intention to be of service into your hearts now, knowing that this is an energetic exchange. And go into your feeling body. This is something that doesn't happen in the corporate world very often. We don't go into our feeling body and acknowledge and feel the emotions that are within us. So go within and accept whatever emotions are within you. And feel them. Feel them fully without necessarily even needing to understand why they're there. Just feeling them. There may even be a mixture of emotions if you go looking. It's like go searching, maybe into the emotions that you'd prefer not to feel even. You're allowing yourself to feel them fully. Emotions held from the position of the premise that you are whole and valuable and complete already. Emotions held from that knowing are sometimes the gateway to intuition. Sometimes they're the catalyst for you receiving inspiration. And so let's hold your emotions in that context right now. Remembering, though, that you are already whole, already complete, already valuable, which when we travel the corporate world, we often don't believe to be true. And so just for a moment, observe yourself, imagining like as if you're in a bird's eye position, looking at yourself in your role. with your team, with your manager. Perhaps you are the manager. With a bird's eye view of complete honesty and acceptance and unconditional love. Look down upon yourself and observe behind all your doing, behind all your action, who are you being? Are you being self-serving? Or are you being in service to? Do you believe that you're not good enough? And therefore lead from competitiveness, either being better than or staying in the less than role. Do you operate from a sense of control? Or do you operate from a sense of faith and trust and surrender? Do you blame when things aren't going well, when you're not happy? Do you blame? Do you make that the reason of somebody else or of something? And so I'm here to remind you that this is an energetic exchange catalyzed by Alana's genuine intent to be of service to you, to elevate your leadership into an experience that is full of joy, full of experiencing who you really are. Experiencing your authentic power. Experiencing freedom to be in that authentic power. And so with that in mind, allow your intuition to speak to you now. Just as my first son spoke to me, a completely non-rational experience. Allow your intuition to speak to you. What does the infinitely loving version of you want for you, seek for you? Why did you listen to this episode? What was the bigger picture? Not the rational intelligence, but the divine or the energetic intelligence. Heart intelligence. Because your heart intelligence only seeks your greater happiness. And that can even happen in your role. And finally, is there a choice that you're invited to make now? To ground what you may have received. And so beginning to close this meditation, knowing that you can come back here and receive more of your heart's intelligence. Thanking yourself for being here. Really embracing yourself. Turning love onto yourself. Taking a big, deep breath, but this time being an energizing breath in and out. And when you're ready, moving your fingers and toes and yawning and stretching and opening your eyes.
That was Gisele Gambi. And thank you so much to Gisele for coming on the show today. Gisele's impact in my life has been beyond words. And, I really trust that her insights that she shared today will impact you deeply, positively, and ripple out into your world. I will be putting Gisele's links in the post and in the episode. So if you're wanting to learn more about Gisele and her work and her writings and her videos and her podcast, you're more than welcome to do so. Speaking of links, I will also include a link to the Facebook community for the Eastern Influence Corporate Leader, where we have more discussions like this. And there's lots of questions and lots of things to look forward to in that. So that's on Facebook. You can DM me on Instagram or on Facebook for that link. And if you have loved this conversation today, what I would love is that you share it with someone. So sharing it with your team member or your leader, just someone who you really feel that it's going to resonate with and have an impact with. I would be so appreciative. And in greater service to you, I'd love if you could subscribe or follow on Apple or Spotify or wherever you receive your podcasts so that you can see when new episodes come up. should you feel to, you can leave a review and rate the podcast. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can do that on the Apple Podcast app or on Spotify, or you can even DM me. So I'm available on Instagram or Facebook. Well, I hope you have such a lovely evening or morning or whatever time of day it is. I hope you resonate in that. And I feel that that's an episode that you may want to come back to maybe once again or twice again to really soak in what we're talking about there. So I'll leave that with you. Have an amazing time, and we'll catch you on the next show. Thank you.